Welcome to the Modcast with Eddie Pillar and Friends, sponsored by Peckham Rye. So, tuck in your dickie, straighten your Peckham, and let's begin.
Hello and welcome to episode 11 of the Modcast.
Is it 11?
Yeah, it's 11.
So we've nearly done a year.
Well, Johnny, we have actually done a year.
Have we?
Yeah. So my guests this week are cyclist Bradley Wiggins and sports journalist cum soul DJ Mark Webster. Now, it's taken me quite a while to get Bradley on.
He's been obsessed with it. Come on, you've been stalking him.
Listen, the man trains and works for 11 months of the year, and he's got 1 month off, and this is that month.
I was available every month.
And I was, yeah. He's the Marley the Dietrich of mod. That's you are, Bradley.
So, anyway, Bradley, we're going to start with you. Welcome to the show. Thanks for coming in.
Thank you very much, Edward.
Now, CBE, 9-time gold medalist and mod.
When was I 9-time gold?
9?
9, well, including the Junior Worlds.
World Championship, or?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, see?
Is that a gold medal thing? Did you get a medal for that?
I don't include the World Championship. I only work on an Olympic basis.
Well, who would? Who would?
And thank you for that. And Mark Webster.
Yes, no gold medals, so it's easier for me.
And you grew up in Kilburn.
Grew up in Kilburn.
Big Irish community.
Massive Irish community.
Not known for its massive mod scene in the 1990s.
There isn't a lot, actually, amongst my age group, to be honest.
Yeah.
Well, although there probably was, we just didn't know it at the time, looking back.
So how did you find yourself in this bizarre kind of way of life?
Probably just from being a football fan as a kid,
Yeah.
and going to the football and standing on the terraces week after week, and getting into what everyone else was wearing on the terraces, which was trainers, which had to be Adidas at the time,
Yeah.
and probably Fila tracksuit tops and jeans, which was probably how I got into it. And I think as a 9-year-old, 10-year-old, 11-year-old kid, which was those years when I was on the terraces, after that it evolves. You start getting into music more as a kid, and then you start getting into the heritage of it and the roots of it, and then you start sort of dressing appropriately towards that, and you start nodding towards those people, and that's where it come from.
And that's where you find yourself now.
That's where I find myself now, sat in the studio with you, Edward, and sitting wearing a Peckham Rye scarf. Nod to the sponsor.com.
Now, Mark Webster, your journey in life is slightly different, isn't it? You started as a soul DJ.
I did. I'm ostensibly a soul and jazz aficionado.
Now, that music has always been very closely associated with the mod ethos and mod culture in general. Have you ever trod on the left-hand path? Because you're looking rather smart at the moment.
I have. I keep meant to say I'm delighted to be the first Teddy boy that you've invited.
Snowboy turned to step.
No, he'd refute that and say he's an early 1960s rockabilly because he's anal when it comes to detail, as well we know. But as well, you know, the paths cross musically and all that one there. And when I started out as a kind of old soul boy, the look was your 40s and 50s.
Yeah.
And I was picking up Cannibal Adderley albums, trying to look like I knew what I was talking about. And where I was faking it, it kind of ended up sort of creeping through the pores. I ended up just liking it as well, rather than just posing, which is where the first, few months of that all came from. Ed and I have had this conversation. Is that there's this whole idea that mod's kind of intrinsically there, even if people don't know they are or it is. It's just in the water nowadays, isn't it?
And I think also, so if someone says they're a mod, I think you're based much more on being a mod or being very smart by other people's perception of you.
Yeah.
And I think I've seen stuff with Noel Gallagher talking about Johnny Moore. We said he always had impeccable shoes on, always had impeccable trousers and shoes on. You only ever saw the top half of him playing, but you look at his shoes on stage now, and I think that's much more of a marker of someone being impeccably dressed or having a bit of a...
It's an ethic, isn't it? It's a value.
Rather than just the simple label, the three-lettered label, yeah?
Someone putting a Parker on, growing their hair long and saying, yeah, I'm a mod.
Of which, no doubt, someone who's on X Factor now will do that before the end of the
Yeah, I mean, when I was a kid and I first picked a guitar up, it was like I was 15. I was mad into Oasis. 1994, it was like the boom of Oasis. Yeah. So I grew up with Oasis, really.
Do you think that kind of pushed you towards mod?
Oh, massively so, yeah. I mean, you couldn't help but, like Noel Gallagher and that. I mean, he was sort of, for kids of my age, that whole thing with the Britpop thing, I mean, that just started something else for us. Before that, there was the Smiths, the Stone Roses and that, but I was probably just a little bit too young to be into that, really. So when Oasis started, it was like 3 chords, anyone can pick a guitar up and be a rock star, and that was pretty much what it was like for us. When I was 14 years of age at school, if you weren't into rap music in Kilburn, you were into Oasis or, at the other side of the water, Blur. So, I mean, it was...
and you were an Oasis man, not a
yeah,
Blur man.
massively so, yeah. I mean, I grew up with him right through the late 90s and that was pretty much sort of for me. And they used to go on about people like Paul Weller, and that's you start looking back at Paul Weller. 95, Stanley Road came out. I bought Stanley Road. Then you start looking at Style Council, and before that, The Jam. So that's where that all started for me.
And then eventually you find yourself back in the 60s, where it all kind of...
Yeah, my uncle was probably... big part of that, really. He was massively into Small Faces, and I used to go up there and look for his record collection, and we found this band called the Small Faces and started listening to all those things, you know, Itchy Park and all that, and then you start getting into that, and then you see that's where Weller was inspired by, and so that's where that all started for me. And I think at the same time, 1992, I went to watch a small band at the time called Ocean Colour Scene at Shepherd's Bush Empire.
Yeah.
And they had this massive nod towards the mod thing, you know, and that was where it started. You know, outside the Shepherd's Bush Empire, you had all these lads turning up on scooters from the local areas and that. And you think, what are these guys? What are they all into? You know, and you saw them with the Parkers and the scooters, and you start looking into it, you start delving further into that. And that's where that, you know, you see Ocean Colour Scene on stage sort of with their sort of wink to the whole mod scene and that's where then you start looking back at the whole thing. We didn't have Google at the time, so you couldn't have a look at back then.
Yeah.
But, you know, that's where that
Do you
whole
remember
thing...
I don't. No.
Mark, punk rock, Oasis...
Oh, pass me by.
Yeah, you didn't like
No, look at me. I was deeply ingrained. I was done. I was
But this
spent.
50s thing, you know, you talk about the 50s thing, you look a little bit 50s now, but all the time I've known you, you've looked 60s.
See, you love that thought, don't you? You've looked at me through rose-coloured glasses all these years, Pillar. I am wearing a Peckham Rye scarf because that's the nature of this podcast, of course.
Yeah.
But I have moved forward, whereas you boys clearly staring backwards down the gun of history.
For those that can't see, Mark has a woggle on his scarf, and the rest of us...
And if you go to our YouTube site, I see Chris, who's filming today, is actually
He's got
focusing in on the woggle.
Let me show you. Let's show you how woggle works, everybody.
Bradley.
Right.
And of course, if you're listening on the podcast, that's a terrible podcast.
Yes.
Whoa!
Bradley,
It's like a whoopee whistle for Scar. What?
Right, that's enough.
Whoa!
Webster, Bradley,
excited.
woggle doesn't do it for you, does it?
No, not really, because my son wears one of them to Beavers.
Yeah,
Well, we've all worn one of those to Beavers before.
I want to say that the main reason we do the podcast is because you had me on your football podcast, didn't you?
I certainly did, and you came along and you spent the entire time saying, I have no interest in your football, I support Orient.
We got a question in from one of our Twitter followers who said, what is, and this is to both of you actually, what is the ultimate mod sport?
Well, to be honest with you, cycling's got to be a great start because you're long. To be long and narrow is definitely an advantage, isn't it?
Yeah.
In your game. You know, if you were built like me, imagine me on the mountain leg of the Tour de France. Picture me now, Bradley. Stare at me and picture me now. He's staring at me and picturing me now.
No, I don't.
All the colour,
He looks concerned.
all the colour has gone out of him.
I don't know, you know. There's a bit of a myth that cycling, but all the cyclists I know are terrible dressers, you know.
Yeah.
So I don't know where that comes from.
So maybe it's,
I
Athletes
think it's
aren't
more a retro thing where they look back at like Tommy Simpson and the people like that.
Yeah.
And they were fantastic dressers off the bike, but I think that was just a cultural thing at the time in the 60s.
It's just physically. Swimmers.
It was
See,
very
swimmers are physically
socially
built
acceptable
to
to
be
wear a
mods.
suit in the 60s,
Yeah.
whereas now you look like a bit of a weirdo if you're wearing a suit before 10 a.m.
yeah.
Because you don't... Let's
And
not-
actually, if I'm totally honest with you, going back to the teddy boy thing, I never had a father, so I got brought up by my grandfather, who was a teddy boy through and through. So I had a different generation outlook on
Yeah.
things. And he was through and through into the clothes. That's where I got the dress thing from. And he was a massive darts player, so we used to go to darts competitions in different pubs, working man's pubs all around London. And you see some of the clothing, some of the attire, some of the darts players would wear back then. And it was phenomenal in the early 80s and that. And that's where that whole thing came from. So I would actually say darts players.
See, that's the thing. Before the
That's not bad.
before the bowling shirt came in and ruined everything in the world
but
of darts.
you look at darts back in the 70s and 80s
Yeah.
and what they were wearing on the hockey was incredible. You
I
only have to
remember-
look at the shoes of the fellas. They never show you the shoes on darts matches, do
No.
they? But you look at the trousers and shoes, phenomenal.
There's one fella I know actually blew a world championship when he got his dart caught up in his narrow tie. I know that happened.
Now listen, we talk about styles a lot, in spite of the fact that most mods are bald these days. But anyway, I remember there was a famous quote in the media where your wife said that you were devastated because your trainer made you cut your wings
No,
off.
I mean, we're not...
Was that true?
Yeah, climbing mountains in 35-degree heat for an hour at a time.
Flapping about.
Doesn't, a Weller mop doesn't go well with that. So
It doesn't make you aerodynamic enough having wings.
No,
like
not
Eddie,
just
does it?
that. It's not nothing to do with that. Just the heat it generates having this mop on your head.
See, I did think it was
So I
aerodynamics.
do.
You've got to say.
I do shave it off for the big.
Could he knot them behind your head? I don't know. I don't understand.
And it's half a nightmare washing it every night and straight.
Oh,
Your first lot was like you won a bronze in Athens, was it?
Sydney, yeah.
Sydney.
Yeah.
Then you win a gold. You just kind of forget about your bronze at that point.
No, I don't think you do. No,
less
I think
important. Or...
No. It just goes with the collection. It's part of It becomes. I think every year you do, and it sort of becomes part of your career, really. And your palmarès, as they call it in France. You're sort of building up this sort of CV, as it were. So it just becomes, and you move on to the next thing.
Your roll of honour at the end of the career, yeah.
It's like, in musical terms, you write a hit number, you try and do another one. And you don't live off of, your best hit at the time. So I don't know, when you're a kid, everyone says how many gears you got on your bike, as if it was some sort of way of being cool. What status?
Five was massive.
I got a 23-speed mountain bike, mate. What you got? And now I just don't know. No, I never get asked, how many gears you got on your bike, son? I never get asked that anymore, so I don't know. I couldn't tell you. I got the latest Shimano Durace, whatever that is. I don't know.
But you don't use them all when you're working. You don't.
I
use
think
all
you
the
do.
gears.
I don't think you do, but you don't. It's not something I get asked regularly now. How many gears you got on your bike, mate?
All right.
He's the worst cyclist you've ever had on here.
When I was a kid, you go down the corner shop and you meet a group of lads, and it was like, what bike you got there?
Yeah.
How many gears you got on it, mate? like it was some way of being cool. I don't know.
It was.
I've got a 23-speed racer back at my house. Well, let me see it. Go on, show me. You're lying. But I don't know now. I don't know what. So now we always work in ratios, not necessarily how many gears you got. It's more sort of what front chainring have you got, what rear. So
that's where the theatre is, Brad. That's where.
So if someone said, what chainrings do you use? Then you could answer the question straight away. Not how many gears have you got.
That's one you'd have to actually know the question, the answer in advance to say chain rings.
But now we know. Now we know.
Now, Bradley, what do you got coming up? Obviously, this is a very big year for you. Olympics and Tour de France. You're going to be in training from now till then.
Yeah, I've got a Noel Gallagher gig tonight. And,
I thought you were going to see the specials as well. Are they
no,
all
not
on?
tonight.
Are they all
not tonight.
on?
No. Just I've actually started back now training. So we got 2 months now of training until Christmas. And then we go into training camps in Spain in January, and then the season starts and it builds up. So it's like an 8-month process now to the Tour de France.
I would have thought, that after a month off and taking it easy and hanging out in Soho and all that kind of stuff, that you would have thought, I've got to go back into training. But you were positively gagging for it.
I love
weren't
it, yeah. I couldn't live the life I've lived for the last month forever, because I'd be potless and I'd be fat.
Hey, dude, welcome to my world.
I've got Jimmy Five Bellies behind the screen there who looks after me.
Now, we're going to keep a big eye on you, and I hope you come in after you've won your next couple of Olympic golds.
How can I get your love when you keep on snatching it back?